Hey, I'm Brandon, and we're going to be going over the GX5 series hydraulic diaphragm pump, specifically the takedown of the LFP45 model. But this isn't exclusive to the LFP45 model. You can use this as a reference for all the models of pumps, though they might look a little bit different. The way they function on the inside is the same. Some pumps have more diaphragms and more valves, but again, it's all the same. So, what you'll need for all of these bolts, except for the oil plug that's underneath, and the oil plug location will vary for all your models of pumps, but for the LFP45 it is this brass plug down here. You will need a 13mm socket for all the bolts except for the oil plug. That will be a different size. So the first thing I'm going to do is take off my elbows, and the elbows you'll already have on your hose. The larger elbow will of course be your inlet and the smaller will be your outlet. Put those to the side. And then this whole manifold assembly right here, this round assembly, we call the manifold assembly. So the first thing you're going to want to do is there are two bolts on each side that are holding the manifold assembly to each head. And underneath each head will be the diaphragm. So go ahead and back those out. And then inside each of the head as well, there is a loose squared nut in there. You want to make sure you don't lose those when you take these apart, because they will fall right out. And also the bolts that hold the manifold together, and then the bolts that hold the heads together, and then there are also some bolts inside of here that hold the manifold assembly to the actual pump body itself. They're all different sizes, so you want to make sure you keep the bolts separated so you don't put the bolts in the wrong direction. And just before you take everything apart, just note your inlet side and your outlet side, and then which direction the valves are facing. The pumps aren't made so you can only put in parts one way. You can put them in backwards. So just make note. What I like to do is I like to keep everything that's on my inlet side to one side and everything that's on my outlet side to another side, so I don't lose track of which parts go where. Also, what I like to do is I like to get a Sharpie, because preferably you like to keep the same head with the same piece that you're connected to. So get a silver Sharpie, mark a 1 over here. On the back side, mark 2, and on the bottom here, put 3 marks, and then you can keep everything together. And then don't forget to take out these bolts as well that is holding the manifold assembly to the pump body. You also want to make sure you don't leave the washers inside there. You don't want to lose the washers to these bolts. Now that all the bolts are loose, go ahead and you can just pull your manifold off. And then again, take note of where these valves are sitting inside. So this is my inlet. The valves right now would be pulling product into the diaphragm head. Inside the manifold here, there's nothing in here. And you can see this little lip right here, how the lip will fit in here, and this green fitting will be your gasket. So this will hold the gasket in place. And then same thing on this side as well. You have that lip. Make sure you take note of which way the valves are facing. and then you might not be able to get these out with your hands. So the next thing you can do is just pull or take the bolts off the head first. And then again, your nuts that are in there, make sure you keep track of them. You don't want to lose those. And then inside your head here, this is just all a poly piece. You can stick your finger in here and push your valve out. Then just put your head to the side. As you look inside the pump here, this blue piece will be your actual diaphragm. Underneath of it will be your piston. And then this bolt right here is the same size bolt, you'll want a 13mm socket. And whenever I'm inside the pump here, I don't want to use an impact, especially when you tighten it. But whenever I loosen it, I still use a socket wrench. So here's your bolt. But make sure you don't lose your bolt either. And then this holds your bolt to the stud that is sitting in here. And this stud is also threaded into the piston. So to take this diaphragm out, just go ahead and pull on it. You'll see on the diaphragm where it sits in, one side will be for your fertilizer. This will not be labeled. On the inside will be for your oil. This will be labeled oil right there. You want to make sure you put these in the right side or you will have issues. So like in this case, when I want to inspect my diaphragm, I want to see if there's any visible cracks. So far, this doesn't have any. Another way, you can even kind of bend the diaphragm. You can kind of look around the sides and see if you see any visible cracks. If there's no cracks, if your diaphragm isn't torn, then you're probably good to go. And then same thing on the oil side here. And the diaphragm doesn't feel real hard. When it was sitting in here, it wasn't so loose that it wasn't sealing on the edges. So that's also another way that I know the diaphragm is good. And then when it comes to the valves here as well, one thing you want to check on the valves is make sure this plastic body is not cracked. You also want to make sure the spring inside isn't cracked or broken in any way. And then on this spring right here, push it in with your finger. Make sure that there's a good amount of tension there, because what will happen when these valves get old is they won't seal correctly, or they won't seal all the way, and then they start to lose their tension, which typically when your pump surges, this could be an issue that you're having as well. And when your diaphragms tear, what can happen is most commonly your fertilizer will get in through the fertilizer side into the oil side and start mixing inside your pump and get into your oil glass. Typically, if your oil looks kind of milky, then you'll know that your diaphragm is torn. You need to replace it, and you need to get new oil in there as well. Sometimes what will happen though, if your diaphragm is torn, not as common, but your oil can seep out, and then you're running the pump without any oil, and of course that's not good either. When you want to drain the oil, go ahead and just undo your oil plug, take off your cap, all your oil will drain out. Once you take off the diaphragm, you'll also have a little bit of oil that seeps out from here, so just keep that in mind. And then go ahead and do the same thing with the second and the third diaphragm. And sometimes the diaphragm will get so stuck in here that you can't get your hands underneath of it and pull it out. Do not get a screwdriver or some other piece and try to push into the diaphragm to pull it out, especially if you're going to use that diaphragm. That will damage the diaphragm, and oil and fertilizer can seep through, so don't do that. Go ahead and on your motor shaft here, you can just spin your motor shaft and have the piston try to pull the push the diaphragm out, and then see if you can get a grip on it. And that is the best way to pull out the diaphragm. And you can even see how I have some oil seeping out here. As I turn the motor shaft, you can see how that piston moves forward and backwards. So that would be the complete disassembly. Of course, in here will be your oil. It is a non-detergent 30-weight oil. Once you get your new diaphragms, reassembly is just the opposite. So we'll go ahead and we will reassemble it right now. I'm going to use the same diaphragms because these ones are okay. I'm going to confirm that I'm looking at my oil side here. I am. That says oil. I'm going to put that diaphragm back on. And you want to make sure as well, this lip that's here, it's the same on the other side as well. Get that lip inside here. You'll see where there's a little lip cut out. The diaphragm will have to sit in there. And sometimes you might have issues where it pops out. That's also just the positioning of the piston. So you can move the motor if you need to again, and so you can get your piston to seal when you put your head back on. And go ahead and just start your thread. We don't have to tighten these down all the way right away. Put them together in a star pattern. And when you tighten these, again, just remember, everything on here is poly except for the silver body. Everything is poly. Don't use an impact when you tighten it. I'm only going to use an impact just to get the bolts closer to the body. But when you're actually tightening it, use a socket wrench. You don't have to make these real tight. That's why we're not using an impact. And this is an important part as well. When you are tightening this, again, do it with hand. Do not do it with an impact. Because what will happen if you tighten this with an impact and you over tighten it, you will strip the threads of this bolt, and you can even strip the piston. And it is a real pain to strip out that piston, and it is expensive as well. You don't want to deal with that. Use a socket wrench. And again, it doesn't have to be real tight. So now that I have my heads back together, I want to go ahead and I want to put my manifold assembly back on. And I remember that my manifold assembly was on this side. So I'm going to grab my valves, and the way the valves, they'll always go in the same direction of flow. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my O-ring first, and then put my valve in. And then you can see how these all fit in. Alright, I'm going to go back, and again, there's where my lip will fit in over the O-ring. Sometimes you have to hit it a bit to get it in, but you'll get it mostly flush there. And then go ahead and just grab your nuts here, and then you'll see where one end is raised and the other is flat. You're going to want the flat end towards the body, so as the screw goes in, it will hold the diaphragm head and the manifold assembly together. We just wanted to grab that nut here. We'll start with the outlet side now. And you'll do the same process, put in the bolts or the nuts, and then you will put in the bolts. And you'll see there's a little bit of a crack between the manifold and the diaphragm head. As you start to tighten these, those will close together. Again, this is just poly. We don't need to be very tight with this. Once you have those tightened, go ahead and just inspect where they meet. Make sure that there are no gaps. I don't have any gaps, so we are good. The very last piece are these 3 bolts that hold the manifold assembly to the pump body. You'll want to put those in. And then when the pump is reassembled, go ahead and put your elbows back on where your plumbing is at. And then these nuts here, just hand tight is all. And you'll see there's an O-ring where it seals on the inside. Also make sure you check these O-rings as well. Make sure they're not cut or shrinking or damaged or anything. You wouldn't want air to be leaking in or any liquid to be coming out through your lock nut here. And then when you put your motor back on, make sure you put some anti-seize on your shaft. Then you can put your flange back on and put your motor back on that. So for the next time you have to take it apart, it's not a pain. And also make sure you put in the oil. It is marked with a maximum and a minimum. Go ahead and just don't exceed the maximum. And then once you fill it with oil as well, go ahead and kind of move the pump around, get oil moving in there. Move your shaft as well. And when you do that, sometimes the oil will go down a little bit and you'll have to add some more. So just make sure you do that so you don't have to do it later. And that is the complete pump assembly. Feel free to give us a call if you have questions at 877-218-1981.